Chapter 7. Their world fell apart. Joel's eyes began to shift back and forth underneath his eyelids. The darkness had enclosed the deepest recesses of his mind, sending him into the familiar, recurring nightmare from his distant past. He is on a wooden staircase from one of the earliest memories that he can recall. He and Davy are toddling on the stairs, play-fighting with plastic swords and shields. They are so young that Davy is barely out of diapers. Another small boy joins in, who is the youngest. He also has a sword and shield and throws in their favorite blue ball. All three boys bounce the ball around with their shields. The ball bounces down the stairs, and they go down to try to retrieve it. The small boy leads them, his brown curls bouncing playfully. All the boys are so little that they have to climb down one step at a time. Joel thinks that the staircase is as big as a mountain. A wooden splinter hurts his hand for a moment, but he moves on. They finally reach the bottom, and the floor has turned into solid gray rock, jutting hard into their knees. Their ball has bounced through a small tunnel within the wall. The air is thin, musty, and cold. Davy wails in fear, but Joel and the other boy urge him on. Just as the three boys are almost through the tunnel, ice begins to form on the walls. There is a low growl and several high-pitched shrieks.
No!
It is their mom's voice, a very youthful Lydia, shouting in fear. She, Daniel, and an older lady drag the three boys out of the tunnel and scoop them up quickly. Daniel looks just like Joel does today. After they rush the boys back upstairs, an older man with a hard, familiar face slams the door and bolts it shut. Joel was jolted awake from his nightmare with a sensation of falling. The air was freezing and he could hear thunder in the distance. It rolled in closer and closer and ripped right through the house. Crash. The mirror on his dresser fell and broke, as well as many of his family pictures on his walls. Joel was knocked to the floor and began stumbling around his room in a stupor, swaying from side to side. Chester was barking and hopping around. Lightning surged between the red clouds that covered the blood moon.
Davy, it's an earthquake.
Mom, Dad, Rachel! We have to get outside!
Joel's windows burst into shards as he ran past Chester and helped Davy downstairs. Although there was a thick darkness somehow, there was just enough glow for Joel to see his way through the house.
Joel!
Yelled Rachel. The boys staggered to the lower level.
Mom, Dad!
Davy yelled, making his way toward their room in the dark. The banister was cracking. Daniel reeled out of their room.
I can't find your mother.
Mom, where are you?
Yelled Joel. He tried the bathroom door, but it was jammed tight. Joel flung his body against it and managed to force it open, but there was no sign of Lydia.
Rachel, you and Davy get out of here!
Joel and Daniel frantically searched from room to room as Rachel and Davy ran toward the doorway. They had checked every closet and the shower was empty. As they made their way to the basement, a deep smell of sulfur began to fill the house, which caused them to cough violently. They managed to check off that area before staggering back upstairs.
Mom!
Yelled Davy from the doorway. Then he saw their dog begin leaping around more frantically.
Chester, come on, boy!
Davy darted away from Rachel to reach Chester, but the walls started cracking and the floor continued to sway.
Lydia! Lydia!
Daniel's eyes grew wide in desperation.
Dad, the floor is breaking!
Joel barely managed to pull Daniel and Davy out of the front door before the floor caved in. Chester had reached the entrance and yelped when a beam pinned him down. The boys worked together to reach in and pull him out. Rachel's head was bleeding. Her wide eyes rolled back. She collapsed behind them, and Joel managed to break her fall. As their house crumbled, Davy grabbed Daniel as he dove back toward their house in a last attempt to save Lydia. The four of them cried out, huddling together as their world fell apart. Davy stared in shock as Daniel and the others started to dig through the rubble to find Lydia, calling out her name continually.
Lydia!
Trees were snapped around
Mom!
their yard, several interwoven with their landscape flower beds and porch swing. Although they were unaware, neighbors cried off in the distance as they poured into the streets, but not one sound was heard from Lydia. The devastation became more apparent as the sun rose dimly over the small town and its countryside. Thick black smoke filled the air, and visibility continued to be limited. Power lines crisscrossed the roads. Other houses were likewise demolished. A few fires were scattered here and there, and sirens began to blast onto the scene. Police and rescue attempted to help the shattered citizens. Officer Ralph and other rescuers went to Joel's family and started the long search for Lydia, brick by brick. Joel felt an emptiness that he had never felt before in his life. He had ripped the cleanest piece of his shirt and managed to stop Rachel's bleeding. Soon, she regained consciousness, but remained weak. Joel held her in his arms as he and the others continued to yell his mother's name until their voices gave out. Paramedics arrived to help Rachel and the others, but Daniel refused any medical attention. Joel persisted in giving him water, and Daniel finally accepted it. He drank it down, letting it run down his muddy beard. He continued leading the boys and rescue workers in the search, lifting the pieces of their home even after his strength gave out. As the sun drifted past midday, Daniel's cries grew the bitterest. He sounded like a wounded animal as his bellows tore deeper from his soul. Hours dragged on for what seemed like days. Smoke began to spread more and more throughout the area, making breathing and visibility even more limited. Then the rumbling returned. The rescue workers warned everyone to get out.
The ground is unstable. We have to move, everyone.
By this time, Daniel completely
No.
ignored any pleas to clear away from the area. It took a whole team of rescuers to drag him out of the rubble as the ground began to feel like shifting sand. They started running as best they could, falling and stumbling. Then the earth opened up. A portion of the gypsum mines were collapsing underground. Their house and a few neighbors' houses, vehicles, and Red Cross trucks sank and tumbled into the darkness below. Chunks of ground fell like dominoes into the underground abyss. Somehow everyone made it out of the 30-acre radius, but now there was no hope of finding Lydia. Helicopters began to swarm as Daniel's gaze shifted upward. The others gathered around Daniel as he tried to grasp the situation. Finally, the words came.
My wife.
She has to be alive.
I can't lose her!
He clasped his head in his hands, his back heaving as he wept.
We'll keep looking, Dad, as long as it takes.
Said Joel. However, the overwhelming emptiness he felt inside told him it was all over. Joel glanced at Davy, who was staring at the ground in total shock. A nurse had bandaged up Chester's paw, and he was lying on Davy's lap. Nearby, Rachel was being attended to by paramedics, and Joel went back to check on her.
I'll be fine.
She said as they rolled her into an ambulance.
Go and help your dad.
He held her face and gave her one last kiss goodbye before the ambulance rushed her away.
Dad, you and Davy stay here. I'll go and ask the neighbors if anyone spotted Mom. Maybe she was outside when it happened.
He said. He felt as though he was grasping at straws. Joel attempted to hold himself together as every neighbor gave the same negative response that no one had seen her. The thunder continued to roll off in the distance.